Society remembered the 250th anniversary of the Burning of Falmouth. In the fall of 1775, 4 British ships sailed into Casco Bay and wreaked havoc on what was then known as Falmouth, Massachusetts, what we know today as Portland.
The fire was so significant, it helped expedite our break from Britain. And all these years later, there are still questions around why this attack happened. Tiffany Link, who is a Revolutionary War expert at the Maine Historical Society, knows the story well.
Everything would have been closer to the neck portion of the peninsula, which made it a very easy target for Mowat.
Leading a small fleet of ships, British Captain Henry Mowat sailed into the harbor after being ordered to burn any coastal town north of Boston, supporting Patriot activities.
They were sort of relieved because they had a fairly good relationship with him, even though he'd been captured in Falmouth 5 months before. The town had apologized. They'd blamed the Brunswick militia. He acknowledged that it was not Falmouth's fault that that had happened to them and said that he forgave them. But their relief suddenly turned to fear when he said, no, I'm actually here with orders to burn your town.
To me, it sounds like it was probably chaos.
It was complete chaos. So like a lot of the townspeople were in a panic. They had 24 hours to know that something was going to happen.
On the morning of October 18th, 1775, Falmouth, Massachusetts, now known as Portland, was under attack.
Did they just kind of start firing in?
Firing incendiary shot, which would be like hot cannonballs or cannonballs that would sort of like implode on impact and start fires within the town. Keep in mind, they were supposed to kind of confront 9 different towns along the coast in this mission, but they hadn't done that for various reasons. So Falmouth kind of gets the brunt of all of it. You know, they don't have to save ammunition for other locations. They just unload on Falmouth for 6 hours. And then when that doesn't quite do the job, he does send in Marines to set fire to some of the remaining structures.
Everyone survived, but the town was torched. 416 buildings were destroyed, including 136 houses. Artifacts at the Maine Historical Society help bring some of that history back to life.
The floorboard there is from a house that survived the burning. There's some information on the note that says you can see where part of it was burned, but I think it's actually kind of, you can see the very edge of it here. So I think whoever put this note on here actually put it over the burn mark, which is a little unfortunate. That property was directly across the street from Alice Greeley's Tavern, and that was another location that survived the burning. Alice, the proprietor, was actively putting out the fire throughout the day and was able to save both her home and her business.
Most notably, MHS has Mowat's account of what happened that day.
He wrote this the day afterward. You can see it's in a lovely hand, probably of a secretary on his ship or something, someone like that, and then he signs it with his own signature. But he just kind of goes into detail about the course of action and the decisions that he made.
Is it typical for them to write back and say, here's what happened?
You know, they were hoping that this show of force would help quell the rebellion, but I think everyone also knew that the British government kind of attacking its own citizens, especially those who weren't sort of in an active military engagement, probably needed a lot of documentation about why that happened. In this case, maybe a little bit extra important.
So why Falmouth? One account claims a young woman from Kittery named Mary Sparhawk convinced the captain not to burn Portsmouth and instead take his fleet north.
Did he encounter Mary Sparhawk and stay in her father's lovely mansion and, you know, attend parties there? Probably, and I'm sure he got to know people in that manner. And he may have had some affection toward her, but there's no evidence that he went to Portsmouth and then turned around and came back to Falmouth.
Tiffany says there's a more likely theory.
He's probably headed for Machias, where there had been a lot of activity there. Several British ships had been seized by the local militia. It was pretty embarrassing for them. But he got stuck in a storm around Booth Bay and had to turn around because they weren't really supplied for a lengthy voyage.
How significant of a role did the burning of Falmouth play in us declaring our independence from England?
Although Falmouth wasn't seen as a super staunchly patriot town and had still been bombarded and destroyed, you know, so utterly without much provocation, I think really struck a chord with a lot of people, especially throughout the colonies, that Britain wasn't holding back anymore. And it was very shocking that the British government, even to citizens in Britain, that they would choose to fire on their own citizens in this manner. And at first, the people in Britain didn't believe it. And so it becomes a huge propaganda tool in the colonies for a brief time. And it even is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence.
And I know that it's been, 250 years since everything happened, but are there still lessons that we can take away from that moment in history?
This extreme show of force that often is by the aggressor seen as something that can maybe subdue people or push people into submission usually backfires, and it did in this case. So I think we can look at that and say that sometimes bad things can happen, but it can sometimes make you stronger. It can bring you together.
By the way, there are still pieces from that day that can be found around the city of Portland. To learn more, just head to our website or our mobile app.